Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for being at Converge22, and thanks so much for the warm introduction. So the topic of today's chat is how do we get from 5 billion to 5 billion? Where do we come up with those numbers? So if you look on Google, I'm saying that because in case the number is wrong, you get to blame Google. But if you look on Google, there are 5 billion active internet users today. So among all the people in the world, 5 billion people are wired. How do we get them into Web3? Some of them are in Web3, but not enough, in our opinion. So I'm hugely privileged to speak with Nikhil, who's one of the best in the business in product, such a visionary, as well as a great operator, has built so many product organizations, and has already done fantastic things here at Circle. So I'm very privileged to chat with you today, Nikhil, on how we achieve this. How do we build kick-ass products to get people into Web3? So let's get into it, shall we?
Yeah, thank you, Rebecca. I'm very excited to be here. Thank you all for coming to Converge22. It's been really fun and enjoyable to meet many of you and to learn about what you're working on.
Absolutely. So let's, I know the title of this talk is from 5 billion to 5 billion, but let's start with something that is also quite ambitious, but is a necessary stepping stone to get to 5 billion, which is 1 billion. So how do we get to the first 1 billion users in Web3? What are some of the use cases that will get the first 1 billion users into our space? And I'll let you take it away with what's happening at Circle, and then I'll chime in on what's happening at Saga in the metaverse.
Yeah. So this is something I think about all the time, which is $1 trillion in circulation and $1 billion in terms of users on Web3.
Yeah.
When I say trillion in circulation, I think about the amount of stablecoin in the market, not just Circle stablecoin, like all manners of stablecoin getting to $1 trillion, which is a very small percentage of just US M2 supply. US M2 supply is about 22 trillion. And total global M2 supply is north of 50 trillion, right? So can we get to $1 trillion in like stablecoin usage in 5 years? This is sort of one path. The other path is, what are the applications we can build that will be appealing to 1 billion users? And then to do that, I look back to like the evolution of Web 1 and Web 2, and I am old enough to have been part of both. And I think about applications like, the broad classes of applications that are really interesting, that go beyond just the core capital market use cases we've been so focused on. So class one of applications, obviously like payments, we've talked a bunch about. We just got off the main stage where we were discussing Circle's products around crypto payments, and how merchants can get access to users who have this new kind of liquidity, which is really exciting. So payments being one. Something we think about all the time. The other is related to payments, is if you're a business and you suddenly have all of this crypto liquidity, what do you do with it? Mm-hmm. Do you move it around? How do you move it around? How do you make your operations more efficient? And so that's like a class of business use cases we go after. And then there's a class of consumer use cases that we care about deeply, and those are primarily around the classical sort of buckets of interesting consumer applications. We have communication applications, which are massive, just sort of which is probably the most important thing we do on our phones today, which is like constantly chat and email and and synchronous and asynchronous manners of communication. So that is like a big bucket of applications we think about at Circle, and our Web3 services product is focused on giving people primitives to do that well. And then we think about gaming, which is in the mobile ecosystem, gaming is 90% of App Store revenues, and which is remarkable, right? I think gaming is double-digit CAGR. CAGR means compounded annual growth rate. And gaming is still growing at double-digit compounded annual growth rates. So we think about communications, we think about gaming. The metaverse is really interesting. I know you're working on it. I came from Meta, where I was working on augmented reality classes, and I worked on the metaverse for close to 6 years. So what does the metaverse look like? What kind of primitives we need? Will we all be in the metaverse? And it's like a really important and interesting area to discuss as well. And then, yeah, I mean, I think then there are all of these cursory use cases around that. But I think like broadly within these buckets, we spend a lot of time thinking about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to tie in something that's sort of hot off the presses, so I just flew in from Colombia, where we held Cosmoverse, which is the largest conference of the year for the Cosmos ecosystem. And Saga is built on top of the Cosmos stack, so we were there. But what was announced when we were there was that now we're going to have native USDC in the Cosmos ecosystem, which is very exciting. But at the same time, it looks like you guys have started to build rails to interconnect USDC with a bunch of different ecosystems.
Yes.
So that's fantastic, because I think it's really important to hit home that Circle found a killer product in USDC, but you guys are expanding beyond that to look at infrastructure, rails, more robust and expansive payment systems. You're starting to look at metaverse. So in terms of overall broader product strategy and roadmap for Circle, how, when you landed here just a few months ago, actually, and what it is now, how have you seen it change?
Yeah, I think like there is, it is obvious that, it is more than obvious right now that stablecoins is a great killer app for Web3, right? So when I got in, I think we were just sort of coming into the idea of it, like we were realizing it was how important it was, and I think we're very convinced now. It is like you can make money by or you can create scale by building L1s, and there's a bunch of L1s in the market, and they're all interested in scaling, and there's a business model there because you can sell L1 block space. And there's a bunch of trading applications that we've seen that allow for like essentially price discovery and efficient markets for a variety of digital assets. So that's like another class of applications that is doing really, really well. And then stablecoins is the third sort of class of applications in my mind that are, we had the unfortunate event of like US Terra, but like they are a really, really important class of applications. I think about it as a class of application because they act like an application. There is a user interface. People have to understand it. There's an onboarding process into a stablecoin. There's an offboarding process from the stablecoin. And these primitives have like properties that users have to understand, like, like custody and like who's holding my money, is one custodian better than the other, and all of that is sort of thought about like an application. So I think one of the things we changed over the last 9 months that I've been here is now we think about the full application experience around USDC. It is fundamentally a network product. USDC does not have value unless at least two people on the network believe that it has value.
Yeah.
Right? Like you and I have to both agree that if I send you a USDC, that is value exchange that happened between us.
Yeah.
And so it is fundamentally a network product, and we started reasoning about it like a network product, and we started building primitives around it so that people can get access to the great properties that are available of a network product, which is like you get a lot of liquidity, you get ease of use, and then, I mean, our recent Web3 services announcement is about like, okay, well, we have this very unique network product that is really, really important, not just to the Web3 ecosystem, but increasingly we're being talked about in DC as well, as there is new legislation being pushed in DC around stablecoins. So it's important to the regulators, it's important to the government as well. And so, well, how do we build primitives that serve our various audiences? And the audience I care most deeply about is developers, because developers make code changes society, right? Code makes new things happen. And so we're a very developer-focused company. That is the other thing that like I've been pushing on. And I think at this event, you can see like, we are a developer-first. We are trying to be developer-first. Tomorrow we have a developer day. We're going to be doing a bunch of demos. People can come look at them. And we are going to be open sourcing more. We're going to be pushing more APIs, and we're going to keep them competitively priced because we just want more distribution in the space. Like we want more Web3 applications.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's fantastic, Nikhil, because so, I mean, I'm thinking about all the day-to-day problems that we ponder at Saga, and Saga is, I mean, it's a chain to launch chain, so it's infrastructure, but we're focused on gaming and entertainment. And the fact of the matter is, in order to build a successful gaming and entertainment application, you need far more than just the blockchain. You need these primitives. You need onboarding, offboarding ramps for fiat, essentially, because so many of the users that will come into this space are active in Web 2 already, and they're used to paying with their credit card or PayPal or these mechanisms that are very familiar for those of us who have been using the internet for a while. So how do we get them into Web 3? And I got to tell you that there is a whole ecosystem of applications that are developing just to solve those problems. But the trick with that is, even if it's a kick-ass product that is a really great wallet, for instance, or really great for onboarding onto stablecoin, unless other people use it, it's not really helpful for you as infrastructure level to adopt it. And so we're watching what's happening at Circle very closely, because you are looking for that network effect. You don't want to shut off your own network by starting to plug in things that don't have their own network effects. So that's super exciting. And I would love to talk more about the focus on developers. Because I think a lot of us in the space who had a background in Web 2, Nikhil especially, you understand that there's so much talent in Web 2, and they've been curious about Web 3 for a while. I think during the last bull market, a lot of them started to come into Web 3 understanding that there was opportunity here, and then bear market hit. That's not to say that the hiring has slowed from Web 2, but there are a lot of questions to answer about what is the space fundamentally about, and what does it mean to develop in Web 3 if you are accustomed to working in a corporate setting, for instance. You can still do that in Web 3, absolutely, but so many of the core contributors for these ecosystems are lone wolves, or they belong to DAOs, or it's far more decentralized, and sometimes even quite informal. So it's a slightly different culture here in Web 3 still. But how do you think about getting more developers from Web 2 into Web 3?
Yeah, so we've been speaking about this a ton internally, and we've also spoken about it at Converge. I quoted this stat yesterday, which is we have about 20,000 developers who checked into a Web3 repo last month, and we believe we have over 25 million developers who checked into a Web2 repo last month. So there is this big gap, and you can argue that the gap is because there's not enough demand. I would argue that it's really hard to just build a Web3 application. Mm-hmm. It's just you have to understand like core cryptographic concepts, which you don't have to understand if you're building a Web2 application like using a RESTful API. And so we are focused on like bringing that simplicity of like JavaScript and RESTful APIs to Web3. In the places where we can abstract, we will abstract as much as possible. We launched a cross-chain messaging protocol for USDC yesterday. And that is so we increase the fungibility of USDC, and we will eventually build an SDK that wraps that whole protocol. So if you are a Web3, if you are a Web2 developer and you are interested in USDC, but you don't want to deal with the abstraction of chains, we now have like a way, we will have an SDK that makes it possible to go from like, to make it sort of uninteresting to know like what USDC you have on what chain, to the extent possible. Right, so there are primitives, more primitives like this that we are working on. There are things around custody, where key management is extremely hard, and so we want to make sure that if you want to have a user account and you're helping the user manage their keys, and I'm choosing my words very carefully here. We have simple ways for the user to do that, and you can create a custody flow, which is sitting behind an email address or is sitting behind a phone number, but it's still secure via MPC, even MPC computation. So there are ways in which you can bring Web 2 folks to Web 3 via APIs, via frameworks. And then the other thing is we want to do more open source. Like the amount of open source in this space is, I mean, everything is open source, but the source tree tends to be simple and like, it doesn't have a lot of complex projects. And then when it does get complex, it gets branched and becomes its own source tree. Right. And it's a different governance structure. So my dream is we will have some amount of good open source where it is a continuous, like there is no WebKit for wallets. And it's something I think about all the time. I'm like, the browser was such a fundamental primitive to Web2 growth, and WebKit was the way, and there's Chromium and there's WebKit, and like people contribute to it, like, you know,
Right.
and yes, there's Safari and then there's Chrome, but because these engines existed, like new projects could stand up. And what is the equivalent of that in the wallet space? It's something that like I am thinking about very actively, our team is thinking about very actively. We'd like to collaborate with people who are thinking about it. So more open source, more wrappers, more atomic-like transactions, even if they're not fully atomic, which is our bridge. I think some of those things will be really important. And then as we look at like gaming ecosystems, we are looking at like building native gaming SDKs in Unity and Unreal, just so we can make it super easy. If you're building a game, you know how to use Unity. You don't have to go learn, JavaScript or whatever else it is that we like.
Yeah.
We want to meet you where you are, and if you're custodying NFTs, it should be. Maybe there's RESTful APIs on wallets that lets you custody NFTs. I mean, so I think those are the questions we're asking, and we don't want to presuppose that you understand all of these cryptographic concepts deeply. We want to take on the burden of that for the developer.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's another interesting angle into this is a developer will build a cool product, because they think it's going to be a cool product and it has interesting problems for them to solve, but they also want to build something that they know other people are likely to use. And what's happened in crypto, and Nikhil and I have been in crypto for a long time, so we've seen the first winter where everyone thought Ethereum would just kind of go away. And then we saw the big DeFi summer, which led to a big bull market. And the state of the crypto economy is such that there are now services being built specifically for crypto.
Yes.
And so from a developer's perspective, I think it's no longer the case that they're asking quite often, what is this good for exactly? Because even if you're thinking, well, compared to the quote-unquote Web2 version of this is subpar, nevertheless, in Web3, it's necessary to have this product because it doesn't exist in Web3. And so that certain market need needs to be fulfilled. But I still acknowledge, though, that there are things being worked on in the space or new ideas, especially from people who may not have been here for very long, that are maybe not as likely to reach product market fit, is one way to put it. And so when you think about the different categories of things that are kind of like fine as is in Web 2 versus ones that really do need that Web 3 infrastructure, how do you sort of delineate the criteria for that, or how do you bifurcate the two categories?
Yeah, so I think there's some simple rules I think about. Like there are things that were not possible in Web 2. Like self-custody was not a thing. Representation of money as keys was not a thing in Web 2. And that is possible in Web 3. So there's a class of things that were not possible and that are now possible. And why would you want to self-custody? There are many reasons for it. Like, we can. I think there's a lot of religious debate about it as well. So, let's not get into it. But I think the core concept of money being yours is an example of something that was not possible. That is now possible. I think. There are examples around privacy that were not possible in Web 2, where you are using existing systems for communication, where Web 3, you can make stronger guarantees around privacy as well. And then there is, everybody's favorite topic around NFTs, which is around digital ownership, which in like Web 2, I worked at YouTube a long time. I used to run YouTube Music. We used to pay creators over $1 billion. I think when I left in 2013, we paid them $1.2 billion that year. Yeah. And I think like YouTube still pays them like $6-8 billion a year. It's one of the largest contributors to the music industry. And there's a very specific way those monies flow. Like, there is, distribution is controlled by YouTube, ads are controlled by YouTube, the rate is controlled by the label and YouTube together. And it's typically like a 55-45 or a 60-40 split. Yeah. And even though YouTube then does the 60-40 rate with the label, eventually what the artist gets is it doesn't map very well to like, it's not a percentage of that 60. It's a fixed fee that the artist is collecting typically from the label. And the label gets to keep all the upside from the variable that the label is able to achieve.
Yeah.
So I think the question is there more transparency that can be built over there? It is very complex. I mean, those systems are super complex. They're non-trivial to build. And that's why we don't have a lot of YouTubes where like people get paid for making music videos. So I'm very optimistic that once we have a lot of this data on chain, these assets behave like securities that have future cash flows, that get traded around, that will allow people to take on more risk. Because even in YouTube, like, you know how much money you're going to make, but you can't go sell that cash flow to anybody today.
Yeah.
I would love to write a smart contract saying that, I'm making X amount of money every month. I want to do my new album. Can I just write a smart contract that guarantees you 10% of my monies from here, and you give me a loan for my new album? Like, that is a primitive that cannot exist today in the Web2 world.
Right.
Unless like YouTube does a heavy lift, and then you have to talk about their incentives to want to do that.
Yeah.
But it is possible in this Web3 world because like the data is available on chain, and there will be a need from people to be able to do that. So again, still like, these are buckets of things that are like completely not possible. The things I think less about are like things, minor improvements to like things. I just think like those are like incremental improvements to things that are like less interesting. I think like there's so much step function growth that we can create on feature set that we have sort of just gotten used to.
Yeah.
Like, okay, this is suboptimal, but it's suboptimal, and I'm just going to get used to the idea that Google can look at all my email. And that's just okay. I don't know why it's okay. It's just like, it's been okay for 18 years since Google Gmail launched in 2004.
Yeah.
So maybe that's not okay, right? And maybe I want my email to be private. Maybe I want my comms to be private. Maybe I do want to, I want to own like more digital collectibles that I can, that are representation of work and that are not just gifts from the game to me.
Yeah.
So that I can like pass around. And I think all of those things, as we become more empowered consumers in this digital economy, we will care about deeply. So I'm very optimistic that we have the primitives to sort of reconstitute what the new internet is going to be. And like, it's a good time to be excited. I know the macro is not good, and like there are a lot of problems in the world right now, which and some of those problems are way bigger than what we're dealing with. But there's good reason to be optimistic about like what Web3 is going to be able to do. So.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think we're all here and still building in a bear because we are optimistic about the space, and we understand that whatever we build now, as long as we do a good job at it, in the next market cycle, we'll see that hyper growth again, which is very exciting. But Nikhil, you mentioned digital ownership in the metaverse, and that is what motivates what we do at Saga. And just to offer a little bit of my perspective on this, I go back to one of our projects that is building on Saga at the moment, and this guy's story, and it's illustrative of why so many people get into Web3 gaming and NFTs. I confess, when NFTs first came around, I thought, well, this is nice, but why is it worth several $1 million? And I understand there was speculation in there, but so to get back to this innovator that we have, this guy really got into Minecraft. He was in high school, he really got into Minecraft, and he found it more stimulating, frankly. He's very smart. He found it more stimulating than what was happening in schoolwork. He got addicted to Minecraft. And he ended up dropping out of school because of it. And so his parents said to him, well, you're gonna have to support yourself because we do not support this move. And what he ended up doing was making a lot of money building Minecraft servers. Now, he did not own Minecraft. He was part of the community at Minecraft. And eventually what ended up happening was, yeah, he made enough to support himself, but he felt that the contribution that he was making to the community, how well known he was in the community, was not reflected in his status with Minecraft leadership. He felt that all feedback that they had about the game or how to expand the game features, gameplay, et cetera, is all being ignored by leadership. And that's because the game was centrally owned by a publisher, a creator. And what he wanted to do in building in Web3 was to give it back to the community. He has one simple motto that he reminds himself of every single day, which is that the community will always love the product more than the creators. And I think that is what drives Web3 metaverse, is that you will have a community, you'll have a fan base, you'll have people who really, truly attach themselves to this cultural artifact, and they will take it forward, and they need to be compensated for taking it forward, because that is how this cultural artifact grows. And I mean, surprisingly, many of the Web3 rails that we have built that were geared more towards financial services actually serve that goal of digital ownership quite well, which is why you see the explosive growth in Web3 gaming and entertainment, and why Circle is so well positioned to build many of the rails for that.
Yeah, just on that, like I think like we don't know how NFTs are going to be able to, how NFTs will be used to create like new growth vectors for games.
Yeah.
Right? Like one of the hardest things about games is to find users and keep them engaged. And I think last year there was a bunch of experimentation on passing out NFTs before the game was live, and we haven't quite seen how all of that connects. Like I've been, I have a friend at OpenSea that I spoke with recently. I was like, shouldn't I just find my next game on OpenSea, because like I will already have the NFTs, and like why wouldn't I just play my game there? Like, you know, and why does it have to be somewhere else that I go play my game and not OpenSea? And we had a really interesting conversation about it. So like what is search? And when I say search, I mean, how does discovery work? And how does discovery work? How does that intersect with like how NFTs are created? And then how does that all map to what the growth incentives are on the application, which is also about like ownership for the users in the application. This is a complete mystery to me, but it's a really important puzzle to solve. Somebody will crack it, and when they crack it, it'll feel like, oh, it was so obvious all along, right? Like so. It's just, you know, I often give this example of like in 2011 we had this goal at YouTube. We were like, well, maybe we will have 10,000 channels that people will watch. And I think there are over, and people will watch and make over $100,000 a year. And I think today YouTube has millions of channels. There's at least 1 million channels that make over $100,000 a year. And so it's entirely obvious today that you can make money as a YouTube creator. It is not easy to do, but you can do it. And it's only taken 10 years. 10 years is a small amount of time to change society and to create like new occupations and like, new ways of like communication and new ways of being in the world. So we're very early. I feel like we're in like, you know, the early stages of this, but the curves are always steeper in Web3 because we just live in a more connected world now. So very optimistic that like somebody will figure this out, and we will have like new kinds of games and new kinds of metaverses, hopefully built on Saga, that we get to experience, where these new creators get a chance for new distribution, new ownership paths, new monetization methods, which allows for like more innovation. I mean, I've played the same games for too long now, so.
All right, let's try to get some diversification into your gaming portfolio, Nikhil. But you know, it's interesting. I mean, you know, we'll move on to other topics in a second. Just keeping on the OpenSea piece, and why is it that the largest NFT marketplace can't also be sort of the Steam for Web3 gaming? So I think OpenSea might figure this out, and it would be wonderful if they did, because we need this kind of product. But you know, gaming at the end of the day, and this is what all the games who did very generous NFT drops discovered, is it is about the gameplay.
Yes.
You do want to feel like you worked for that magical sword. And when you sell that magical sword to somebody else, it has value, not just because it's a really special magical sword, but also because somebody worked for it.
Yeah, it's the work.
It's the work, it's the status that comes with the work. And so all of that is something that's quite well understood in the world of Steam. I don't know if Steam's going to get into Web3 anytime soon. There is a little bit of friction with respect to Web2 gaming getting into Web3.
Maybe you guys will help them.
Maybe. It's a journey. It's a journey, as we say at Saga. I think if somebody could figure that out, that is a product that is very much needed. It's sort of this game discovery engine, because right now, unless your friends are playing in a Web3 game, unless you're lucky enough to be chatting with them to find out what's latest. I mean, frankly, even at Saga, we don't know what's sort of hottest at any given moment. It takes a BD organization to figure that out. So yeah, lots to look forward to. Okay, so let's step back a bit. I mean, a big theme of this whole chat has been the importance of product in Web3, and it wasn't always the case that product was an important function in Web3. I remember when I first started in 2016 timeframe, you had the business side, you had the engineering side, and the engineering side was like this, and the business side was like this, and there was no product in the middle. You were just looking to build your protocol, launch your token, and the growth would sort of take care of all your business problems. And as we find out, that's not always true. But the industry is maturing, and we're getting to the place where a chief product officer is an incredibly strategic and important role. And we just hired a head of product ourselves. So, with all the success in crypto comes a lot of responsibility. And you think about improving the product, expanding the ecosystem, but you also think about the considerations around policy, legislation.
Yes.
And so as someone who heads up a product function, what advice can you give maybe other projects out there for setting up a product org?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting question. When I first came in, I obviously didn't know enough. Even though, I mean, I've had more than 20 years of experience in industry, working in this space is something else. I joined on the 1st of Feb, and I remember like Feb 23rd, Jump recapitalized US Terra. And they were giving out these 20% APRs on, what was it called, Anchor, I think?
Anchor,
yeah.
Yep.
And here I was like a month into the job, and I was like, well, what do we do now? And they were like, well, this is also a stable coin. I was like, well, is this a stable coin? This makes no sense to me.
Yeah.
And I would call my friends, I'd be like, hey, how does this thing work? Why do you, people who'd sort of been more advanced in the industry, and ask them these questions and get this sort of very unsatisfying answers in terms of how to think about it. So I think one suggestion I have is don't abandon first principle thinking, because we didn't as a team. We set up data streams. We tried to figure out how many wallets Anchor had. There was 40,000. We figured out how much liquidity was there in those wallets, what the velocity of money was. And then very soon we realized that we're gonna wait it out. Where there was no need for us to panic and be worried about the stablecoin market entirely shifting into this new model.
Yeah.
And so I'd say one, first principle thinking, relying on data. Data is your friend. It's very important to remember as chief product officer. I think it's very, culturally, we are not designed as an organization that respects shooting from the hip. You can have an opinion, but you have to back it up. So that's sort of one important tenet. And it's really important in this environment because it is so noisy. And it's very hard sometimes to separate noise from signal, and it's very easy to get swayed by the emotions of the moment. So I think when you have more frameworks, they sort of ground you. You can ground your emotions back into the frameworks and be like, I am feeling this, but it may not be true because the framework suggests that it is not. So I'd say let's stay focused on that. In terms of the people, I'd say my bias is still towards journalists. We have brought in some amazing journalists at Circle, and they have prior industry experience. And when I was interviewing them, I just wanted to, we meet a lot of journalists, in terms of people who want to work at Circle. And as the market has matured, it's clear that we are a good company to work for. The two things I look for are sort of intellectual horsepower, because there is so much to comprehend. You cannot do it if you're not curious. And generally, curiosity and intellectual horsepower are correlated. I don't know if it's causal, but it's definitely correlated. So we care deeply about it. And then we build our team around people who are just very, very interested and are just have the intellectual horsepower to do the work. And then culturally, we also weed out people that we don't want, who may not be the right culture fit. I think those things matter. We are less sensitive to seniority. How many years have you been in the industry? We're less sensitive to how much about crypto do you know. Most people, in my experience, know enough in 6 months to be dangerous. And we do bias a little to technical folks, people who have been engineers before, or have a computer science or some technical background or a mathematics background. Because we know that like a lot of the concepts over here around cryptography, around distributed systems, around even user experiences, need you to understand what a JavaScript library is, like what a web page is, like how does iOS work, how does Android work, why can you do some things in Android and not in iOS. So it is sort of like this very expansive, interesting world to live in.
Yeah.
And so you have to be really self-motivated, or like you will, as a product person in this space, like you will fail very fast. If you're sort of used to your Rails and you're like, I just want to stay within this and I know how to do these things, and it's going to get very overwhelming very fast. I mean, the amount of information that comes at us, as you probably know, is tremendous. And we are always like making sense of it, and we are categorizing it. We're saying like, this goes in this box. Okay, let's worry about this, not worry about this. And you have to enjoy that. I enjoy it tremendously, but like, I think not everybody does. So, So my advice is like, look out for those people who enjoy the work tremendously, and are not just coming in because it's interesting. I mean, I've been interested in this space for 10 years. A lot of the people we've hired have been interested in this space for like years and years and years, and just have now decided to make the transition.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense, and that's really great advice. I mean, it is hitting that sweet spot between people who are very rigorous and curious and have the intellectual horsepower, but they're also flexible in their thinking. You have to be very broad-minded in your opinions in crypto. And I think for us, it was quite similar. When we hired in our new head of product, his name is James Ross, he's fabulous. We were thinking of, one very specific thing, which was we were sort of at an inflection point in Saga. So a lot of layer one protocols out there are protocols first and foremost. And so you focus a lot on development in the protocol level, and you have to have highly skilled engineers to be able to do that. So we built an engineering org geared towards that purpose. But because we are focused on gaming and entertainment, and there's a lot that goes into gaming and entertainment applications other than just the infrastructure, we also needed to build a platform on top of the protocol. Which doesn't happen often in Web3. And so we needed to find a product manager who would be able to work with the engineers who were doing the core engineering on the protocol level and building out some really cool and cutting edge things, but at the same time be able to interface with all the developers and innovators who are building on Saga and taking their feedback in a really effective way. And honestly, it's part of it is looking at the data and absolutely being close to the customer, really understanding, listening hard, and hearing the things that they are not actually saying to you, but that they mean. So there's all of that, but at the end of the day, there is a certain judgment call that product managers and chief product officers have to make with respect to getting all this data. Do we go ahead with this feature or not? What should this feature look like? These are decisions that ultimately rise to the level of an executive decision. And so we looked for that judgment aspect as well. In terms of building out the product team, fully agree. People who are at least interested in the space, but you don't have to be super knowledgeable. I think one of the lesser aspects of Web3 is still that it can be quite insular. And so welcoming in new talent is really incumbent upon us who have been in this industry for a long time to welcome in. People who obviously are smart, but who are constantly looking to learn, and not just from Twitter. If they're on Twitter all day long, if they're really just trying to build up that Twitter profile, nothing wrong in that, but I'm gonna send you over to the marketing department. So people who are really looking to deeply understand these problems, and when they do come up with opinions, yes, we do want them to be backed up by something, whether it's data, whether it is a very sort of well thought out logical pattern of thinking that went into this opinion. I mean, these are the kind of superheroes that we'd like to hire into our orgs. So we're getting towards the end of our time, but I would love to bring it back to how we started this conversation, which is how do we get to the first billion? So we talked about how. And this, for those of you who have been on crypto Twitter for a while, you'll recognize this, but sort of when billion is my question. So the way that we express when in Web3 is WEN, because the H is just not cool enough. I don't know how these things work.
Not useful.
Right, exactly. It's not useful. Thank you, Nikhil. It's a much more charitable way of putting it. But when billion? When do you think we're going to reach the first billion users?
I obviously don't know on what time scale.
Yeah.
But we can talk about some things that maybe need to be true for us to get there.
Yeah.
And I think the first billion user application will be some sort of communication.
Yeah.
We'll have some core communication primitive that is important and novel that we still don't know what that is, right? We've had a few communication-based apps, happen in the last decade. That Snap is a great example. It was like it chose the camera as the primitive. They were like, okay, well, all communication will start with the camera.
Yeah.
And that was just a new idea. And then WhatsApp was a communication primitive that was like, well, it's just text and it only needs your phone number. And there was no online identity. So I think this is something I think about a lot. I think there will be some communication primitive that we don't fully understand yet that is going to emerge, that will resonate very broadly, that will solve a problem that users have today that we're not able to solve. We can categorize those problems in terms of privacy. We can talk about identity. We can talk about a lot of things. I obviously don't know, otherwise I'd be building it right now. Number one. Number two, I think money is obviously the other killer application that helps us get to 1 billion users. I think people will demand more of their banks. They will demand more of their phones in terms of managing their money. They will demand more of their telecom operators in terms of managing their money. So we don't know what that looks like. And so far, your Apple Pay or your Google Pay is like a super simple thing. You have a credit card in it and sort of communicates with the NFC chip. But my expectation is people will say like, well, I want to self-custody my funds. How is my phone helping me back up my keys? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah.
And when I travel, like what kind of affordance and usability does that give me? So I think like there is a giant market in terms of like how money movement evolves, so like peer-to-peer money movement, like consumer to business money movement. I think, and then third, I'm excited about gaming as a vertical as well, tremendously, because I do think there will be new ways in which people will use digital ownership to create new gameplay. Right now it is just a store of work, but I think it'll also create new gameplay scenarios that like we still don't fully understand. And I think, and then those will become ways in which you grow. Like, I mean, in 2008, 2009 on the phone, all the gaming was on consoles.
Yeah.
And people thought phone gaming was stupid and it would never make any money. I was there. And then it became so big because, they found new primitives, like in how to engage. The games were free, and that was a crazy idea.
Yeah.
And they would only be monetized using ads and in-game purchases. Well, that makes no sense. I mean, you go spend $60 on a game back in 2008, buy FIFA, whatever, 2008, and play it all week.
Yeah.
But here's FIFA on the phone that's free. And you can start playing it, and maybe when you want to buy that jersey, you got to pay a little, and you got to pay a little more. And that is how most of games work today. That's 10 years ago.
Right.
So, yeah, I'd love to hear your ideas on this as well. But I do think I think these are three ecosystems I'm excited about, which will like help us get to that 1 billion users.
Yeah. No, Nikhil, that's fantastic. And if I could cheat a little bit here, I think the killer app is, oftentimes when you think about a product that's really going to infiltrate the market in hockey stick, it's going to be something that solves a very specific problem.
Yes.
But when I think about what Web3 can offer, I'm thinking about all three of the things that you mentioned.
Yeah.
Actually, communication, money, and gaming. I think part of the reason why crypto and Web3 did so well in pandemic was that people were isolated and they had no way to really reach out to others, to any sort of human company other than online. And there are Web2 tools that can help you do that, but Web3, just because of the community aspect of it and the fact that ecosystem is just so endemic to it, people really, really found a home in Web3, and that is what forms a lot of the user base for Web3 nowadays. I do think that trend in society did not stop because we stopped lockdowns.
Yes.
I do think that people are still looking for that sense of community, that group of people that are like-minded, with whom they can chat on a regular basis, with whom they can form real friendships, whether they know these people in real life or not. And so I think you'll start to see balkanization actually, and this is kind of what has happened in Web3. You'll start to see balkanization before you see a lot more connectivity between these different ecosystems that offer things like money, like games with interesting gameplay, and communication, is that these communities will find each other first. And then inevitably they'll want to trade assets with one another. They'll want to find cool people in other communities, and you'll see that connectivity. And I think it's really in that, what we call interchain,
Yes.
that you're going to see a lot of really, really killer apps emerge. Interchain itself is not the killer app. Interchain has to be an open source tool that other ecosystems can use. But in terms of the apps that really, really kill it and bring about the first billion users into Web3, it is those apps that are going to take advantage of that interchain space. So Ethereum talks to Solana, talks to Cosmos, talks to Algorand, Avalanche, et cetera.
Yeah,
That's how I see it.
we believe in that. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're at time. I don't know if we're allowing time for Q&A. We're happy to stick around, but at any rate, Nikhil, it's been a fascinating conversation.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you all for being here, and we're around if you'd like to ask any additional questions. Thanks so much, guys.